The Life and Trial of Socrates, read and published by Mr. Books. Socrates stands out as one of history's most enigmatic and influential thinkers, whose relentless quest for truth and virtue laid the intellectual foundations of Western philosophy. Emerging from the bustling and ever-changing milieu of 5th century BCE Athens, Socrates' life encapsulated the city's evolution from an artistic and intellectual beacon to a society grappling with profound internal struggles. Unlike his contemporaries, Socrates left behind no written works. Instead, his philosophical inheritance has come down to us through the testimonies of his students and adversaries, with Plato and Xenophon being the chief architects of his posthumous legacy. This work endeavors to explore not only the life and philosophical mission of Socrates, but also the broader historical and social context that nurtured and challenged his ideas. The saga of Socrates is inseparable from the broader dramas of his city Athens, at its zenith, racked by war, democracy, and ideological divisions. His methodology, later known as the Socratic method or Elenchus, revolved around probing questions that exposed contradictions, encouraged critical self-examination, and disrupted the complacency of established wisdom. Yet this relentless inquiry made him as many adversaries as admirers. The final years of Socrates' life, culminating in his dramatic trial and death, illuminate not only the perils faced by a society questioning its own values, but also the unwavering moral commitment of its philosopher critic. The charges against Socrates' impiety and corrupting the youth may appear through the lens of history to mask deeper anxieties about the fate of democracy, the maintenance of tradition, and the boundaries of dissent. His trial, verdict, and composed acceptance of death have since become enduring touchstones for philosophical discussion concerning justice and the right to speak freely in a democratic society. This book advances through 8 comprehensive chapters, moving from the humble origins of the philosopher through the rich tapestry of Athenian society to his circle of friends, followers, and detractors. The narrative then delves into the mounting tensions of turbulent Athens and the inexorable path to Socrates' prosecution. The heart of this volume, chapters 6 through 8, focuses on the trial itself, exploring the complexities and injustices of the process, then his final dialogues and death, and finally, the enduring echoes of his legacy across centuries. In rendering the life and intellectual journey of Socrates, this book aims not only to provide an account of a singular figure, but also to invite readers to reflect on the very nature of philosophy, the responsibilities of citizenship, and the perennial tensions between the individual and society. Socrates' life and death urge us to continually inquire, to question assumptions, and to embrace difficult truths in both our individual and collective lives. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button to support the channel. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an audiobook that could change your life. Now, let's begin. Enjoy. Chapter 1. The Athenian World, Socrates' Origins and Youth. To understand Socrates, one must first understand the world into which he was born. The city of Athens in the late 5th century BCE was both dazzling and divisive, marked by cultural achievement and political turbulence. It was a city of monuments, poetry, and philosophy, but also one seething with rivalries and periodic violence. In this vibrant environment, a unique philosophical spirit would emerge in the person of Socrates, a spirit characterized by radical questioning and ceaseless dialogue. Socrates was born around 470 BCE in the Deme of Alopece, just outside the walls of Athens. His father, Sophroniscus, was a stonemason, and his mother, Phaenarete, a midwife. Neither wealthy nor destitute, his family occupied the artisan class, a social stratum somewhat distinct from the aristocratic elites, but not without its influence or standing. This background imbued Socrates with a directness and humility that would color his later philosophical engagements. While details of Socrates' early life remain shrouded in the mists of antiquity, thanks in large part to his own avoidance of writing anecdotal stories, preserved in the writings of Plato, Xenophon, and Aristophanes hint at a formative upbringing characterized by discipline, curiosity, and a strong commitment to the values of the Athenian polis. Athens at this time flourished as the center of art, drama, and intellectual innovation, made possible by the economic prosperity that followed the Persian Wars. Socrates would have absorbed the sights and sounds of a burgeoning democracy, including the agora's bustling activity and public debates on ethics, politics, and the gods. Yet beyond these cultural riches, Athens faced enduring challenges. Its democracy depended on the direct participation of its citizens, and its prosperity was threatened by both internal strife and external foes, notably Sparta. Young Socrates, maturing in this environment, would learn the fragility of institutions and the importance of examined belief. He also witnessed the limits of democratic governance, especially as demagogues swayed the volatile citizenry. Military service was a critical component of Athenian citizenship, and Socrates distinguished himself in this sphere. Accounts from Plato and Xenophon detail his service in the heavy infantry, or hoplite phalanx, including notable battles such as Potidea, Delium, and Amphipolis. Socrates' courage, endurance under hardship, and indifference to danger drew admiration and would become emblematic of his later philosophical comportment. These early experiences, facing death in defense of Athens, foreshadowed the steadfastness he would display at his trial. Emotionally and intellectually, Socrates' upbringing was shaped by Athens' climate of dialogue and debate. The sophists, itinerant teachers who charged for instruction in rhetoric and virtue, had begun to exert tremendous influence in Athenian society. Socrates, though sometimes classed among them by contemporaries, rejected the sophistic focus on persuasion over truth. Instead, he posited that wisdom lay in acknowledging one's own ignorance, a revolutionary stance that separated him from his intellectual environment. By his early 30s, Socrates had begun to distinguish himself by his method of dialectical questioning. Rather than lecture or expound, he would frequent the markets and public spaces, engaging interlocutors in a search for definitions and underlying principles. This approach, at times bemusing and at others infuriating, marked the start of a philosophical journey that would see Athens itself become the stage for dialogue about the good life, justice, and civic responsibility. In sum, Socrates' origins were intimately bound up with the particularities of Athens, its democratic ideals, its social hierarchies, and its intellectual ferment. The young Socrates, shaped by these forces, developed into the sage who would challenge the deepest convictions of his fellow citizens, setting in motion intellectual currents that would shape the Western tradition for millennia. Chapter 2: The Philosopher's Mission, Method, Influence, and Enemies. Socrates' emergence as a philosopher was marked by his radical divergence from the intellectual trends of his time. Whereas the sophists capitalized on the rise of rhetoric and civic education, often receiving substantial fees for imparting their wisdom, Socrates dedicated himself to a different kind of pursuit. He sought, above all, to uncover the nature of virtue and the underpinnings of a just life, employing a method that would later bear his name, the Socratic method. This approach, known to the Greeks as elenchus, drew on pointed, structured questioning. Socrates would engage interlocutors, youth and elders, poets and politicians, in dialogue aimed at testing definitions and exposing inconsistencies in their beliefs. The process was not meant to humiliate, but to reveal the limits of knowledge. "I know that I know nothing," Socrates allegedly declared an admission of humility rooted in intellectual honesty. In practice, this meant a relentless probing into concepts such as justice, courage, piety, and friendship, never settling for superficial explanations. Socrates became a fixture in the agora, the public square and heart of Athenian life. There, conversations unfolded for all to witness. His insistence on direct engagement and openness to contradiction became both his signature and the source of public suspicion. The youth, notably Plato, Alcibiades, and Xenophon, were drawn to him as to a wise mentor. However, the same qualities that inspired loyalty also bred resentment among older statesmen and traditionalists. Socrates' influence was profound. The dialogues attributed to Plato foreground Socrates' method and testimony, capturing his unwavering dedication to the examined life. Through these conversations, Socrates' approach to education teaching, by way of asking, not telling, became an enduring model for critical thinking. Yet precisely because of his method's disruptive potential, Socrates attracted enemies. His questioning of accepted wisdom and public figures was seen as undermining traditional values and exposing the ignorance of the powerful. For the aristocrats, such questioning was impertinent. To many Athenian citizens, it seemed subversive. The satirist Aristophanes, in his play *The Clouds*, lampooned Socrates as a sophist, an intellectual charlatan corrupting the youth and mocking the gods. Though meant as political satire, the play contributed to the negative perception that would haunt Socrates in the years to come. Socrates' philosophical mission extended beyond theoretical inquiry. For him, philosophy was a way of life, a continual striving for moral improvement, both personal and collective. He argued that true wisdom lay not in the accumulation of facts or the wielding of rhetorical power, but in the cultivation of the soul. He challenged those around him to question inherited beliefs and to align their actions with reasoned understanding. This dogged commitment to inquiry, unmediated by concerns for reputation or wealth, set Socrates apart in a city where public life was dominated by the pursuit of honor and political achievement. His refusal to accept payment, his simple mode of living, and his public presence marked him as both an exemplar and an outlier. As the intellectual and political life of Athens became increasingly fraught, Socrates' presence took on new significance. He was admired by many youth for his independence and integrity, by the city's moral guardians. However, he was progressively cast as a destabilizing influence. The seeds of conflict between the philosopher and the polis, between inquiry and authority, were sown in the very vigor of his method and his vocation. Chapter 3: Friends, Followers, and Foes. No thinker exists in isolation, and Socrates, despite his iconoclastic methods and self-professed humility, fostered a diverse and influential circle of interlocutors. The relationships formed around Socrates' friends, followers, and adversaries illuminate both the reach of his ideas and the conflicting responses they elicited in Athenian society. His most famous followers were undoubtedly Plato and Xenophon. Plato, through his dialogues, immortalized Socrates as the central figure of philosophical inquiry. He documented not merely arguments, but the dramatic settings in which ideas were tested and forged. In works such as the Apology, Crito, and Phaedo, Plato presents Socrates as an unyielding advocate of virtue and critical examination, placing him at the heart of the Western philosophical tradition. Xenophon, a student and military leader, provided a different perspective. His writings, especially Memorabilia, offer a more pragmatic and perhaps less idealized Socrates, one who focuses on everyday morality and practical wisdom. Xenophon's version affirmed Socrates as a man of unparalleled self-control, piety, and devotion to his friends and city. The divergence between Plato and Xenophon's accounts, underscores the multidimensional character of Socrates' legacy and the varied responses he elicited. Beyond these prominent disciples, Socrates attracted a varied array of admirers. Alcibiades, a charismatic though controversial Athenian statesman, formed a close if turbulent attachment to Socrates. Alcibiades credited Socrates with both intellectual expansion and moral challenge, though his life ultimately diverged from Socratic teachings. Critias, another member of Socrates' circle, grew into one of the 30 tyrants, a regime that would later be used against Socrates to demonstrate the alleged dangers of his influence. Socrates' friendships were not solely intellectual. He enjoyed close personal ties, characterized by affection, mutual respect, and, occasionally, gentle rebuke. His relationship with Crito, who attempts to persuade Socrates to escape from prison, vividly illustrates the balance between personal loyalty and philosophical principle. The dialogues reflect the warmth and intensity of these friendships, suggesting that Socratic inquiry was as much about moral transformation as intellectual stimulation. However, Socrates also made many enemies. His relentless questioning of established authorities and refusal to defer to the conventional wisdom of poets, politicians, and craftsmen provoked widespread resentment. Some, like Meletus, Anytus, and Lycon, the accusers at his trial, were motivated by personal animosity and by the alleged harm Socrates' criticisms brought to public order. The lampooning by Aristophanes in the Clouds, which portrayed Socrates as a corrupter of youth, further contributed to public suspicion of his motives and impact. The polarization of opinion around Socrates reflected wider divisions in Athenian society, especially during times of political instability. The return of democracy, after the fall of the 30 tyrants, saw a renewed focus on public accountability and traditional piety values. Socrates was seen to subvert by questioning the moral basis of religious and civic practices. His association, however tenuous, with figures like Critias and Alcibiades, both deemed threats to the stability of the polis, helped seal his fate in public opinion. These complex dynamics of friendship, discipleship, and enmity did not merely shape Socrates' social world. They reveal the central tension of his philosophy, the challenge of living a life of inquiry in a society deeply invested in its own traditions. Socrates' circle embodied the potential for philosophical dialogue to inspire, but also the perils of challenging collective norms. It was within this web of relationships that the events leading to Socrates' trial took root, setting the stage for one of the most consequential episodes in the history of thought. Chapter 4: Democracy and Dissent. Athens in times of turmoil. The evolution of Socrates' philosophical mission ran parallel to the fortunes and crises of the Athenian state. Athens, at the heart of the Greek world, was both a crucible of innovation and a city torn by war, political upheaval, and ideological division. To comprehend Socrates' eventual prosecution, one must reckon with the turbulent context of Athenian democracy in the late 5th century BCE. At its pinnacle, Athens was hailed as a model of direct democracy. Citizens, though a minority amongst a greater population of women, slaves, and foreigners, exercised a degree of participation unique in the ancient world. They deliberated and voted on major issues, elected their own generals, and presided over juries numbering in the hundreds. This flourishing civic culture, however, was fragile and frequently tested by both external pressures and internal discord. The most persistent threat to Athenian stability was the Peloponnesian War, 431–404 BCE, a protracted and devastating conflict against Sparta and its allies. The war exacted a heavy toll on the city. It depleted resources, fostered factionalism, and destabilized traditional structures of authority. It also led to a hardening of attitudes regarding loyalty, piety, and the limits of public speech. In the midst of crisis, radical democracy gave way at times to oligarchic experiments, such as the rule of the 400 and the subsequent regime of the 30 tyrants, brief but brutal episodes of autocratic governance that left scars upon the civic memory. Socrates, though not a political activist in the conventional sense, became a lightning rod in this charged environment. His criticism of unexamined belief and his willingness to challenge prominent figures were increasingly seen as threats to the city's cohesion. Moreover, his association with notorious individuals, particularly Alcibiades, whose defection to Sparta and role in the oligarchic coups were viewed as betrayals, cast suspicion on the philosopher himself. The fact that Critias, another of his acquaintances, became a leading figure among the 30 tyrants, a regime remembered for its violence and impiety, further fueled exploitation of guilt by association. The shifting fortunes of democracy and the anxieties surrounding civic identity contributed to a growing intolerance for dissent. Promoting inquiry and independent thought in such an atmosphere became a risky endeavor. Socratic questioning was not merely academic, but was interpreted as undermining revered traditions and destabilizing the city's moral foundations at a time when unity seemed imperative. Added to these pressures was the deep current of religious sensibility running through Athens. The city's prosperity and safety were attributed to its relationship with the gods, and public piety was a matter not only of private conscience, but of civic security. Thus, when Socrates was accused of impiety, of introducing new deities, and failing to honor the old, this touchstone accusation resonated powerfully with those anxious about the city's fate. In this era of uncertainty and threat, Socrates' role as both a critic and a teacher of the youth raised the specter of corruption in the eyes of many citizens. Was he, as his accusers maintained, undermining the city's stability and leading minds astray? Or was he, as his followers insisted, the conscience of a city in moral turmoil? The final years of Socrates' life unfolded amidst these tensions, his fate entwined with the complex interplay of philosophy, politics, and piety. The city that had nurtured his inquiry would, in the end, condemn him for embodying its deepest contradictions. Socrates became not just a victim of the state, but a symbol of the enduring challenge that dissent poses to democracy in times of crisis. Chapter 5. The Road to Accusation. The road to Socrates' accusation and trial was not the result of a single act or incident, but the cumulative effect of years spent challenging, questioning, and defying convention within a society grappling with its own instability. The background to his indictment includes the charged atmosphere of post-war Athens, individual hostilities, and the complexities of public memory. After the fall of the 30 tyrants and the restoration of democracy in 403 BCE, Athens faced the monumental task of reconciliation and reconstruction. The new regime enacted measures of amnesty to protect against retaliatory violence. However, beneath the veneer of unity, tensions simmered, particularly regarding issues of accountability for the political traumas of the past. The return to democratic rule reasserted traditional values and scrutiny of those seen as undermining civic harmony. Socrates' continued prominence and influence, especially over the city's youth, placed him in the crosshairs of those eager to re-establish orthodoxies. The formal charges brought against Socrates were twofold: impiety, esebeia, failing to respect the state-recognized gods, and introducing novel divinities and corrupting the youth of Athens. While these accusations appear, at first glance, to concern religious and educational matters, they were inextricably linked to broader fears about the philosopher's challenge to the status quo. The architect of the prosecution, Meletus, was a young, relatively obscure poet who, allied with influential figures like Anytus, a powerful democratic politician, and Lycon, a representative of the oratorical class, gathered sufficient support to bring a public case, grave, against Socrates. The involvement of Anytus was especially significant, as he viewed Socratic questioning as a threat to the democratic order he had helped restore. Underlying the formal accusations was the anxiety that Socrates' teaching and methods might lead others, especially impressionable youth, away from traditional values, as personified by the cases of Alcibiades and Critias. The city's repeated experience with political upheaval left it deeply suspicious of those who, like Socrates, encouraged debate and skepticism about inherited norms. Public opinion was further poisoned by the lingering influence of Aristophanes' The Clouds, which, although performed decades earlier, had etched an indelible image of Socrates as a corrupter and innovator. The man whom Plato and Xenophon revered was, in the popular imagination, dangerously subversive, a man who undermined the very foundations of Athenian civic identity. The legal process itself gave structure to this atmosphere of suspicion. Athenian law allowed for public prosecutors to bring cases in the name of the city's gods and traditions. The panel of 501 jurors reflected the breadth of democratic participation, but also the susceptibility of the populace to emotion and rhetoric. The trial of Socrates, then, was as much a reflection of Athens' anxieties and divisions as it was an adjudication of his individual guilt or innocence. In sum, the path to Socrates' accusation was paved by the gradual accumulation of doubts and resentments, fostered by both his methods and the shifting fortunes of the city he called home. Chapter 6. The Trial of Socrates, an Unjust Justice. The trial of Socrates stands as one of history's most consequential confrontations between philosophical inquiry and civic authority. Convened in 399 BCE, it galvanized public attention and left a legacy that would provoke reflection and controversy for millennia. Socrates faced three principal charges: impiety, introducing new divinities, and corrupting the youth of Athens. The legal mechanism underpinning his prosecution was a graphe paranomon, or public indictment, lodged by the citizen Meletus and supported by Anytus and Lycon. A jury of approximately 500 Athenians, representing a cross-section of the polis, was selected to assess both the truth of the charges and the appropriate punishment. The trial's record survives primarily through the accounts of Plato and Xenophon. According to Plato's Apology, Socrates delivered a defense that was at once defiant and illuminating. He denied corrupting youth, arguing that, if unintentional, he should be instructed rather than punished, and if intentional, it was implausible that he would choose to harm the city through its future citizens. Regarding impiety, Socrates asserted that he believed in divine agencies, his daimonion serving as proof, though his personal religiosity differed from popular custom. More than just a legal defense, Socrates' speech was a philosophical manifesto. He invoked his divine mission, holding that the god Apollo, through the Delphic oracle, had declared that no man was wiser than Socrates, an enigma which prompted his lifelong quest to reveal the limits of human knowledge. He turned the proceedings into an inquiry on virtue, challenging the jury to reflect on the highest duties of a citizen. Socrates refused to pander for sympathy. He rejected offers to exile himself or to beg for mercy, steadfastly maintaining that he would not abandon his mission to seek wisdom and encourage self-examination. His frankness and unwavering adherence to his principles likely alienated many jurors, confirming his critics' charges of arrogance and intransigence. The outcome was a narrow verdict. Socrates was found guilty by a majority vote. As per Athenian law, he could propose an alternative punishment. Socrates, with characteristic irony, suggested that he be rewarded for his service to the city before, under pressure from friends, reluctantly offering to pay a fine. The prosecution, however, pressed for death, and the penalty by hemlock was pronounced. The trial of Socrates was less about concrete crimes, and more an assertion of the city's boundaries, religious conformity, the moral guardianship of youth, and obedience to communal norms. Socrates, in placing principle above expediency, offered a new vision of what it means to be a citizen, even as he was condemned by his own polis. His trial endures as a cautionary tale regarding the tension between democratic rule and the freedom of thought, between communal integrity and the challenge of dissent. Chapter 7. The Death Sentence and Final Dialogues. Socrates' condemnation inevitably led to one of the most philosophically charged deaths in history. He was sentenced to death by ingestion of a mixture containing hemlock, a penalty administered with clinical detachment but fraught with existential meaning. While awaiting execution in the Athenian jail, Socrates was visited by friends and followers, particularly recorded by Plato in the dialogues Crito and Phaedo. These final conversations illuminate the character and conviction of a man facing his end with unwavering composure. In Crito, Socrates discusses whether he should flee Athens, aided by friends who had means and motive to organize his escape. Socrates, however, rejects this path, arguing that to violate the laws, even unjustly applied, would betray his principles and undermine the rule of law. He sustains that one must never repay injustice with injustice, and that respect for the city's legal order transcends even the imperfections of its administrators. In Phaedo, Socrates contemplates the nature of the soul and the philosopher's attitude toward death. The dialogue is marked by serenity and depth. Socrates reassures his distraught companions by asserting that death is not to be feared by one who has lived in pursuit of wisdom and virtue. He offers arguments for the soul's immortality, suggesting that true philosophers are already, in some sense, preparing for death by freeing the soul from bodily distraction and moral impurity. The moments before his death are depicted with a mixture of tenderness and gravitas. Socrates drinks the fatal draught surrounded by friends, calmly instructs them on ritual matters, and offers parting words of trust in the ultimate justice of the divine order. The stoic acceptance of his fate, rooted not in resignation, but in philosophical conviction, underscored his dedication to the examined life until the end. Socrates' death was a singular event, a voluntary acceptance of injustice for the sake of principle, a literal demonstration of his belief that the unexamined life is not worth living. His friends mourned not only the loss of a mentor, but the silencing of a voice that had personified reason challenged to complacency and dogma. In the trial and death of Socrates, history glimpses a model of philosophical courage, a willingness to endure both misunderstanding and mortal danger, not for private advantage, but to affirm the highest ideals of thought and conduct. The dialogues of his last days thus serve both as mournful farewell and as enduring summons to conscience and courage. Chapter 8. Socrates' Legacy Echoes Across Time. The ripples emanating from Socrates' life and death extend across centuries, shaping the very contours of Western intellectual, ethical, and civic tradition. His legacy is multifaceted, encompassing not only the realm of philosophy, but also law, education, and the idea of individual conscience. The immediate aftermath, Plato, Xenophon, and the Socratic schools. In the wake of his death, Socrates' memory was vigorously preserved and transformed by his disciples. Plato, arguably his greatest student, built an entire philosophical edifice upon Socratic foundations, exploring issues of epistemology, ethics, politics, and metaphysics through the dialogue form. Xenophon, less speculative but equally devoted, offered a more practical account of Socrates' life and character. Their portrayals, while not without divergences, ensured that Socrates' spirit would not be effaced. The succession of Socratic schools, Cynics, Stoics, and later skeptics attest to the versatility and endurance of his method. Philosophers, as diverse as Diogenes, Epictetus, and even the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, acknowledged their debts to Socratic questioning and virtue ethics. Influence on philosophy and beyond. Socrates' insistence on critical inquiry, the autonomy of reason, and ethical self-examination became the bedrock of philosophical practice. The Socratic method, decades and centuries later, would serve as the blueprint for education, particularly in law and the sciences, where questioning assumptions and pursuing clarity remained central. His notion of care for the soul sparked religious, ethical, and psychological inquiries. The image of Socratic martyrdom spurred debates about the nexus of individual and society, conscience, and law questions taken up by Enlightenment thinkers, political revolutionaries, and modern democracies. Voltaire, Kant, and John Stuart Mill, among others, drew inspiration from Socrates as a champion of intellectual freedom. Socrates in the modern imagination. From literature to film, the figure of Socrates has appeared as a symbol of integrity and the quest for truth. The dilemmas he faced, how to live, when to obey, whether to question, remain ever relevant. His name and example have been invoked by those who resist tyranny, challenge intellectual complacency, or seek to educate not merely to conform, but to liberate. The enduring question. The echo of Socrates' life resounds not just in texts, but in every instance where individuals and societies confront the hard questions, refuse easy answers, and accept the cost of honest reflection. His lasting bequest is not a doctrine but a method, not answers but the courage to ask. In closing, Socrates of Athens stands not simply as a martyr or sage, but as the ongoing challenge to each generation. What is the good life, and are we prepared to undertake the inquiry, regardless of the cost? The shadow of his trial and the light of his inquiry remain with us still. Thank you for your detailed instructions. Let's proceed step by step according to your request, crafting a book inspired by your title and themes. Socrates' legacy echoes across time. It is not uncommon that the voices of the greatest thinkers transcend the confines of their era, but few have resonated through the centuries with such clarity and persistence as Socrates. The conclusion of his life in the shadowed courtroom of Athens marked not the extinguishing of a philosophical fire, but the transformation of a legacy, one whose echoes can be discerned in the currents of thought, governance, and moral philosophy even to this day. The unending dialogue. Socrates' approach to wisdom, a wisdom always pursued, never claimed, has given rise to the enduring spirit of dialogue. The Socratic method, a dialectical process of questioning and answering, has become a cornerstone not just of philosophical inquiry, but of education itself. In classrooms around the world, from ancient lyceums to modern seminar halls, students and teachers alike engage in this dance of inquiry, continually probing deeper beneath the surface of assumed knowledge. Even outside academic circles, Socratic questioning persists in legal procedures and ethical debates. The cross-examination of witnesses in courtrooms mirrors the relentless pursuit of contradiction and inconsistency that Socrates wielded so deftly in the Agora. The very foundation of the scientific method, rooted in skepticism, observation, and revision, bears the imprint of Socratic humility in the face of uncertainty. Philosophic heirs. The immediate disciples of Socrates shaped the destiny of Western philosophy. Plato, his most devoted student, constructed volumes of dialogues centering on Socratic engagements. In these texts, Socrates appears not merely as a mentor, but as a protagonist and an ideal someone for future generations to emulate and meditate upon. Plato's own philosophy, and later that of Aristotle, stands atop the foundation laid by Socrates, who charted the course from mythos to logos, from received tradition to personal examination. Beyond the classical giants, Socratic influence seeped into the fabric of later philosophical and theological movements. The Stoics Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius adapted Socratic resilience into their own visions of endurance and morality. Christian theologians found parallels between Socrates' martyrdom and the narratives of sacrifice central to their faith. The humanist thinkers of the Renaissance, Enlightenment philosophers, Descartes, Kant, Nietzsche, and even existentialists like Kierkegaard and Camus, all found themselves in dialogue, willingly or not, with the ghost of the Athenian sage. The courage of conscience. Perhaps the most poignant lesson from Socrates is his steadfastness to his principles, even in the face of hostile authority. His refusal to escape from prison, his acceptance of the hemlock, are immortal exemplars of what it means to live and die for one's convictions. This model inspired countless dissidents, reformers, and intellectuals from Galileo and Mandela to Martin Luther King Jr., all of whom cited Socrates as a justification and encouragement for pursuing truth against the tide of prevailing opinion. This courage of conscience extends beyond physical bravery. It is Socrates' moral courage, his insistence that the unexamined life is not worth living, that has become a rallying cry for personal authenticity and responsibility. In a world where individuals are often swept up in collective beliefs, Socrates urges us, gently but insistently, to ask, why do you believe what you believe? Have you scrutinized your assumptions? What, if anything, would you be willing to risk for the sake of truth? Shadows and reinterpretations. Socrates' legacy is not without its shadows. Through history, the very obstinacy that made him a hero for some has rendered him a troubling figure for others. Some see in him the seeds of elitism, the philosopher's disdain for the ordinary or for democracy. Others raise ethical qualms over his subversive influence on the youth, as charged by his accusers. Modern re-examinations, taking into account diverse voices and contexts, have complicated the hagiography, reminding us that no great figure is untouched by the ambiguities of history. Yet, in these tensions, Socrates' legacy becomes all the richer, for it is the hallmark of true philosophy to unsettle as well as inspire, to rouse both admiration and critical scrutiny. Modernity and the Socratic spirit. Astonishingly, in the digital labyrinths of the 21st century, the Socratic impulse proves more vital than ever. In an era drowning in information, dogma, and noise, the humble act of inquiry, tempered by humility and open-mindedness, upholds the integrity of free thought. Socrates teaches us that, even now, wisdom begins with acknowledging ignorance, and that courage is measured as much in the courage to question as in the courage to answer. To engage with Socrates is to embark on a journey that has no ending nor a clear destination. His life, trial, and death are not relics of a bygone era, but living challenges, posed anew for every individual and every society that seeks to live justly, bravely, and wisely. In this unending echo, Socrates lives still urging us, as he once urged his fellow Athenians, to seek truth without fear, to converse earnestly, and to never cease the lifelong pursuit of understanding. If you found this video helpful, inspiring, or entertaining, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on future content. Your support means the world. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.